The Schutzstaffel is perhaps the most notorious name of the Second World War. Ordered to carry out the racial and genetic purification of the Greater German Reich, the SS aimed to destroy every enemy of the race-based state, and carried out its duties in the most brutal of ways. Men and women were forced to kill themselves through backbreaking labor, while others, deemed of no use, were killed right where they stood. Following Hitler's release from prison, the Schutzkommando was formed as a personal bodyguard for Hitler. It was quickly expanded to become a national organization with regiments all over Germany. It received its most infamous name, the Schutzstaffel, or Protection Squad, in late 1925. It guarded Nazi party events all over the country, engaging in brawls with anti-Nazi agitators. Over the years, the SS grew to be one of the most important groups within Nazi Germany. Placed on its shoulders was the responsibility for the ethnic cleansing of Germany and the extermination of all supposed ethnic and genetic enemies, such as Jews, the Romanis, gay men, the disabled, and other antisocial elements, such as prostitutes. By 1933, the SS had 209,000 members, and with the creation of the Dachau concentration camp, the final solution had begun. Over the next 12 years, the SS waged a campaign of genocide and torture, all in the name of racial purity. Property was stolen, businesses were destroyed, and millions were killed. The SS acted upon the genocidal urges of the Nazi regime and left endless bloodshed and misery in its wake. The concentration camp system was established in 1933. The camps were initially rather small and almost exclusively held political prisoners. After the opening of the Dachau camp in 1933, the camp's remit grew, and they were used to house other supposed enemies of the state, such as Jews, Romanis, gay men, and common criminals. The SS Totenkampfverbände, the Death's Head units, were placed in charge of overseeing the running of the camps, and thus were also responsible for the atrocities committed within them. The camps were also used as a source of slave labor to aid the Nazi war effort. Those forced to work were expected to work themselves to death, allowing their drawn-out executions to benefit the war economy by way of mining, working in factories, or even constructing the concentration camps themselves. Camp workers were also supplied to private firms, working in factories for Messerschmitt, Junkers, and others. The life of a forced laborer was a hard one. There was no interest in keeping the workers alive, even if it meant they slowly became unfit to work by way of injury or malnutrition. One of the largest forced labor camps was the Mauthausen camp in Austria. Situated near a granite mine, Mauthausen was a vital cog in the Nazi machine and helped supply resources to factories producing machinery, tanks, V-2 rockets, and even chemicals and medications. Prisoners at the camp were also rented out to local businesses, such as farms and construction companies. It was the most profitable of all the forced labor camps, earning 11 million Reichsmarks in 1944, equivalent to over $94 million in 2024. In 1942, 3,300 prisoners were working at the Mauthausen quarry. The work camp was administered by the SS Kommandoführer, but it was the Kapos, other inmates, often violent criminals, valued for their willingness to use violence, who worked as slave drivers. They worked for 11 hours a day, non-stop, on a minimal diet, and little consideration for their health. The work consisted of back-breaking labor, mining granite by hand, and transporting it down the line. Explosives were sometimes used to loosen the rock from the earth, but often this was done by hand with pickaxes and hammers. Some prisoners were arbitrarily assigned to the Strafkompanie due to committing certain offenses or going against camp rules or regulations. Those sent to this punishment company were given the task of transporting the quarried stone, carrying lumps of granite weighing as much as 50 kilos on their backs. Those sent to Mauthausen did not survive long, and were never supposed to. As inmates became infirm and unable to work, they would be routinely pushed over the edge of the quarry as a method of execution, with these incidents being referred to as suicide by jumping, and the dead being referred to as parachutists. Mauthausen was nothing short of a death sentence, but a prolonged one, intended to squeeze the last remnants of productivity from those condemned. Disabled victims. as a party obsessed with racial hygiene, eugenics, and the idea of pure blood. Disability was a concerning topic for the Nazi Party. It was believed that those with birth defects and other problems were only a burden on German society, who risked infecting German offspring with their inferior blood. Aktion T4 was the name of the campaign of involuntary euthanasia, which lasted from 1939 to 1945. Around 300,000 were killed in the operation, with almost half being taken directly from church-run asylums and care centers. A precursor to Aktion T4 was the 1933 Law for the Prevention of Hereditarily Diseased Offspring. This law mandated the sterilization of all conditions believed to be hereditary, which included epilepsy, schizophrenia, and imbecility. Within 6 years, 360,000 subjects had been sterilized, many of whom would go on to be executed under Aktion T4. The Aktion began seriously following the outbreak of the war, and by 1941, 5,000 children, considered Lebensunwertes Leben, life unworthy of life, had already been euthanized. There was a level of secrecy surrounding the extermination, excluding some who asked for their children to be euthanized. Most were told they would be sent to special care centers where they could receive better medical help. After a short period of assessment, the children were killed, usually with an injection of phenol, a toxic chemical, which would also be used for the execution of prisoners. The program was expanded to include adults, and not just newly born children, and registers were compiled of all institutionalized individuals. Quickly following the successful invasion of Poland, all hospitals and mental asylums within the Vortherland had been emptied of patients, all of whom were executed by the Einsatzkommando. The Aktion T4 continued until the end of the war, despite being formally ended in 1941. Following the war's end, the doctor's trial was held in 1946, trying 26 Nazi doctors for crimes against humanity. After a 140-day trial, 16 were found guilty, with 7 being sentenced to death. Auschwitz-Birkenau. The SS was the machinery of the Holocaust, without whom the genocide would have been impossible. Staffed only by the most ideological zealots, the driving objective of the SS was the total extermination of the Jewish race. This objective, the final solution, was achieved through the operation of the infamous concentration camps, the most recognizable being Auschwitz-Birkenau. At its peak, Auschwitz was a large complex comprising over 40 subcamps, covering almost 1.5 square kilometers, and staffed by over 4,500 men and women of the SS. 1.3 million people were interned there throughout the war, with only 200,000 surviving. Prisoners were transported into the camp in rail cars intended for transporting cattle to slaughter. Packed in tight, unable to move, often in unbearable heat, and without food or water. Many did not even survive the journey there, dying where they stood, unable to even fall upon the ground. On arrival, men and women were separated, and all were assessed. Those unfit for work were sent directly to be executed or were used in medical experimentation. Punishment was commonplace at Auschwitz. Almost anything could be cause for punishment. Unsatisfactory work, asking for more food, smoking, or relieving oneself. The most common were beating and whippings. But perhaps the worst was to be confined to Block 11. This building, also known as the Death Block, was a specially designed barracks, specifically for punishment and executions. The worst of Block 11 was the standing cells, a 1 square meter room without windows. 4 prisoners were placed inside at a time, forced to stand all night for days on end, sometimes as many as 20 days, in the pitch black, without food or water, able to breathe only through a small 5-centimeter hole in the wall, but still forced to work during the day. Many of the SS guards at Auschwitz went above and beyond their official duties as camp guards and orderlies, and took part in their sadistic sessions. Any prisoner could be set upon at a moment's notice, whipped, beaten, or even forced to stand for hours, naked in the cold. Denying prisoners the right to use the bathroom was also a common form of punishment, as they were forced to humiliate themselves in front of others by soiling themselves whilst working. Perhaps the most brutal man to have ever served at Auschwitz was Otto Wilhelm Moll, also known as the Butcher of Birkenau. As commander of the extermination zone and crematorium, he presided over the murder of hundreds of thousands and was personally and physically responsible for the deaths of hundreds himself. According to the former prisoners, he was the most sadistic man to ever serve at Auschwitz. Multiple witnesses recall him throwing live people into the crematorium pits, leaving the person to be burnt alive in the boiling, bubbling fat of the corpses within. He also did the same with female prisoners, whom he would strip naked and line against the edge of the pit, shooting them in the stomach to watch them tumble into the pit. The Roma Genocide. Roma and Sinti people were, in 1935, declared enemies of the race-based state, the same category as Jews. They were officially banished from the Third Reich in 1942 under the orders of Heinrich Himmler, and most were sent to the specific Roma subcamp at Auschwitz. The Roma genocide began in earnest in 1936. Roma and Sinti people were deported from all of the occupied territories and sent to camps such as Dachau, Buchenwald, Ravensbrück, and elsewhere. The Romani were also subject to medical experimentation. In one instance, around 100 Roma were deprived of food and clean water and allowed to drink nothing more than seawater. The experiment ravaged their insides, especially their livers, and by the end, they were so dehydrated that they would even try and suck the water from cleaning rags or a freshly mopped floor. One of the most important experiments tested on both Jews and Roma was the search for a quick and efficient means of sterilization to further bring about the destruction of the two peoples. Many methods were tried, from high doses of X-rays, surgery, medication, and even the injection of harsh chemicals directly into the ovaries. Those who had their reproductive organs X-rayed then had them dissected, often without anesthetic, to further study what was occurring. By the end of the war, at least 150,000 Romani had been massacred. Some estimates place the figure higher at around 500,000, while others believe it could have been as many as 1 million dead. The Einsatzgruppen. Those Roma and Jews who managed to avoid the concentration camps were not safe from the genocide. A special branch of the SS, the Einsatzgruppen, deployment groups, were death squads operating in the Nazi-occupied territories who murdered the Nazi Party's ethnic and political enemies in their own towns and villages. The Einsatzgruppen often worked alongside the Gestapo and local collaborators such as the Croatian Ustasha, allowing them to find and identify their victims. In some cases, they were responsible for inciting pogroms against Jews and Romani in the occupied territories, allowing the work of extermination to be outsourced to the local populaces, many of whom had high levels of anti-Semitism and anti-Roma sentiment, even before the Nazi occupation. The Einsatzgruppen were most active on the Eastern Front in Poland, and in occupied Soviet territories such as Ukraine and Belarus. They were notorious for their extreme brutality, and even considered by some other SS divisions to be barbarian savages. In the beginning, the murders were given a semblance of legal justification. Victims were sentenced to death on trumped-up charges such as partisan activity. This method proved to be too time-consuming, and mass executions began, with no attempt to justify them any further than mere racial hatred. Victims were forced inside mass graves, and then massacred with machine gun fire, with survivors being bayoneted or shot in the head. The Odessa massacre of 1941 was one of the worst atrocities committed by the Einsatzgruppen. Occurring between the autumn of 1941 and winter of 1942, as many as 34,000 Jews, Roma, and other Odessa citizens were rounded up and killed, weeks after a combined German and Romanian force had captured the city. The catalyst for the massacre was the explosion of a landmine left by the Red Army engineers before them fleeing the city. The mine detonated and killed 67 people, including the Romanian commander. Immediate reprisals on the local Jewish populations were ordered, despite them having no hand in the explosion. The first reprisals were random killings, and soldiers broke into homes and killed entire families, or shot at innocent civilians in the market. Hundreds were killed this way, and many more were taken prisoner and marched to Lustdorf Road. where they were then machine-gunned or burnt alive. Known Jews were also rounded up and interned in barracks, and again shot, or left to burn alive as the buildings were razed to the ground. Within a week of the city's capture on the 16th of October, 10% of the whole city's population had already been killed. In Poland in 1939, there were 3.3 million Jews. By 1945, only 300,000 remained. In total, 6 million Jews, 5 million prisoners of war, and perhaps as many as 1 million Roma were killed by the bloody regime of Nazi Germany. Few who fought the war remain, but thousands who lived through the Holocaust still survive today, many of whom were young children at the time. But with a median age of 86, their numbers are quickly shrinking. And while the opportunity is still there to listen directly to those who lived through the darkest days of the 20th century, we should make every effort not only to preserve their stories, but to learn from them.